It was one of those beautiful autumn days when the sun was shining brightly, but there was a coolness or an element of fall on the way. Well, we decided to go for a hike. The hike was at our local preserve called the Pennypack Wildlife Preserve. We walked for a while through the cool forest before we came to a beautiful field. At that point, we were a little bit hot, and there in the shade of a tree was a bench just waiting for us to sit down and take a break. And that's what we did. I hope you'll enjoy my video and give it a thumbs up. Now let's paint. I started this painting with a drawing taken from a photograph that I'd taken as a reference. After the drawing was complete and I tried to balance the composition out well, I added some masking fluid to some parts of the painting that I wanted to be sunlit with the golden light. And that was one of my primary wishes when I started this painting, was to capture that golden sunlight. I plan to do it with lots of yellows as well as lots of whites and pure whites preserved. The sun was coming from the right-hand side of the painting, so I light up the tree trunk on the right as well as the back of the man's shoulder and many of the weeds and bushes coming up along the path. I wanted some clumps of leaves in the tree to be very, very golden in color. So it was important for me to keep the greens and the blues out of them and keep the color fresh when I added the yellows and golds. The masking took a while. And here I'm using an old ink pen that I have. And the masking was working well that day. Some days it doesn't want to work as easily. It might have to do with how dry or wet the air is. I'm just not sure. Some days it just works well and quickly, and other days it's hard to get on out of the container and onto the paper. But the Peebo masking fluid in particular does really preserve the whites well and does come off fairly easily. I continue to mask all the way across the paper, and I'm working from right to left because I am a left-handed person. That way I'm not going to smear the damp masking fluid on the right as I work left. A right-handed person would be advised to do the opposite and start on the left and work toward the right. In a couple places, the leaves of the weeds were sticking up from bright sunlit patches into shade, and the look was very attractive, so I'm trying to carefully capture that. I figure you can always take out too much white, but you can't always put it back in. In fact, you can't really at all with watercolor. Now I've blocked off the bottom part of the painting with a piece of paper. I've sprayed down with water, and now I am throwing in my yellows with splatter paint. After I splatter, then I start to dab. I want these yellows and golds to be very, very bright. And my next color choice is Viridian Green. Followed by some Cobalt Blue. Where the sky was showing through, it was a beautiful blue sky. Far distant tree line is next, And I'm using Hooker's Greens Dark to start. On the other side of the field, the wood starts up again, and that's what I'm trying to show. After the Hooker's Green Dark, I'm trying some sap green. This tree line I'm trying not to make regular and perfectly symmetrical, but trying to make some clumps of trees higher, some lower, and some almost non-existent. It gives a more natural look to the whole thing. And my next color choice is starting on the distant field, which had several lines of different kind of vegetation coming up. For this line, I'm using burnt sienna. Some more sap green. And I'm leaving some pure whites because the field was quite bright. And now I've moved on to yellow ochre as well as some burnt sienna up into the tree leaves. I do like the spontaneity of spatter painting. For the next strip of field, I spray it down again, blocking off the foreground. And I begin to mark in the bright yellows and golds. And these strips of color of varying shades continue right up toward the middle ground and the foreground, where they move into the shadow of the tree. My general direction is going across in a horizontal fashion, but my strokes individually are going vertical and diagonal to show the direction of the plant growth. As the plants reach the path, they've been worn away by the path, and I curve them downward to show a difference in the way the geography goes together. I think this helps show where the path has been worn down a little bit as well, and adds a little interest instead of everything being flat. For the time being, I'm keeping some of those pure whites. And it's time to get a little darker on some of the leaves. So I've sprayed down the top part of the painting again all around the tree. And I'm adding a second layer of color by dabbing into the sprayed sections. Basically using the same colors as before, but I am using some darker Hooker Green Dark at this point. I'll also mix some indigo into that color to make some really good darks. And then everything will dry and get much lighter. And likely I'll be doing it again. At this point, the tree is also dipping down past the horizon line and into the middle ground of the painting. And so you'll see me continue to dab and dab and dab and dab, adding color and building up color. And now I'm moving into the path. I've shaded the path in with sap green, yellow ochre, and I'm into the portion of the path that is in the tree's shadow. Here I've mixed in some much deeper colors. I've used some purple lake, some purple, and some ultramarine blue. Additionally, I've used some Indian red and burnt sienna. Where the purple lake mixes with the Indian red, I'm getting a beautiful shade of mauve, and I do like that color. I'm beginning to paint in the foreground weeds as well, and they will be some of the most clearly marked weeds because they are closer up to us than the ones further back, obviously. Remembering all that masking is there, and where that's removed, I'll have some nice pure whites. And now I'm deepening the shadow on that section of the field that is in the tree's shadow. I'm using Viridian, and now I'm mixing in some indigo. I'm following the direction up and over the little hillside, but my weeds are going on in a vertical stroke, deepening the actual shadow of the tree and some of the branches as well as the man and the bench. And I begin the tree. I'm marking out where I want my colors to be, and then I'll be going back and adding more layers of color and glazes to build it up to be deep in silhouette. But I do not use black, not in a natural type of painting generally. If black works for you, then feel free to use it. I was taught that black is not a particularly natural looking color in watercolor, and it doesn't translate well. So I try to use a mixture of indigo, Van Dyke brown, purple, and sometimes some greens. The brown cuts the blueness of the indigo, so I don't end up making all blue trees. Although my trees do sometimes have a bluish gray cast to them. But I can attribute that to the shadows that are in nature naturally. You can make any excuses you want when you're the artist, so why not? The branches appear and disappear through the foliage, and that's the way I see them in life. Most times the branch is partly obscured by leaves. And I'm adding a third or a fourth layer of glazing color at this point. And the tree is beginning to get the color depth that I want. It's not all the same color. because some areas of the tree are in deeper shadow than others. So I try to vary that particular kind of coloring as well. Where it's beginning to look very purple and blue, the browns that I use in the shading will dull that out, because the brown is a complementary color with a little bit of orange to the blues that are in the indigo. And I'm deepening the shadows on the far left side as well. And I'm only left with the figure of the man and bench and the large area in the right foreground. So I'm looking closely at my reference photo and looking at the different clumps of weeds and bushes that are growing there, highlighting with whites and yellows where the sun is hitting them, and coming in with burnt sienna and deep greens and indigos where they're in shadow. Moving up back into the leaves of the tree while I still have similar colors on my brush. And I'm doing a little bit more branch work. Here I'm adding some ruts, some grooves into the pathway to make it appear that some sort of car or bicycle or something has driven along and worn some grooves into the path. Maybe a tractor, I don't know. Also deepening the shadows. Adding a little bit more definition to the top of the tree leaves, as well as to the middle ground of the field. And coming into the foreground, I'm deepening the shadows. And at this point, I am jumping around the surface, working in different areas that I am seeing that are needing my attention. I've saved the figure of the man for last, because human figures are hard to get naturally done in a landscape, and yet adding a person can help tie the viewer to the painting, because that helps them to picture themselves perhaps in that setting. But the figure has to be relaxed looking, and it can't be stiff and look like it's stuck on. And that takes a lot of practice and a lot of work. And that's probably the reason I'm putting it off till last. So I don't want to wreck the painting at this point. I'm just starting to like it. And you can see the development of the tree coming back on another time. And it is starting to get the definition and structure that the whole painting needs for the composition to pull together. In a painting that's filled with atmosphere and light and sparkles, When a good solid structure is added, such as a tree, a big tree, it helps to pull the whole thing together. And this tree was a beautiful one, and I wanted to make sure it was a strong focal point of the painting. And it's time for most of the masking fluid to come off. Using my finger, you can use an eraser. You can actually use whatever works for you. If you're using your fingers, make sure they're clean, that you don't rub the paint all over the areas that you kept clear and white so carefully with the masking fluid. And I've kept some masking fluid on the figure. He's wearing a blue shirt and blue jeans, so I'm starting in with his shirt coloring. Adjusting the size of the shoe by painting around it. It was masked off as pure white. And then painting around the chair structure to show how his body is sitting in the chair. All these big clumps of white that were left from the masking being removed are going to have to be reworked so they're incorporated into the general mood of the painting. But that will be part of the final steps. If you leave your masking with very pure, sharp edges, it tends to not look quite as natural. Now, if that's the look you're looking for in a very strong, hard sunlight, it could be lovely. In my case, I'm trying to work with a diffused golden autumn light, so it will have to be worked with and softened. And now I'm painting in the structure of the bench. And this is careful work because I have to get the bench right so it looks like a normal bench. Made out of wooden planks. I have to get the right perspective as well, and the right proportions to the person who's sitting on it. I paint the planks on first, and then when they're just about dry, I paint a wash of color over it, so the plank lines will remain but be softened by the overall color. I've gotten his head painted on, and the basic figure and bench are done. And now I'm working back into the tree. Where I had too much white, I'm coming in with some good strong golds. And I'm starting out with these yellow colors because they are my lightest color. I generally try to work light color to medium color to dark color last. As I paint in these yellows onto, next to, and around other colors, it is softening the lines of masking and incorporating the tree into a more natural form with all the clumps of leaves. A little splatter painting to keep it fresh. And now I'm moving into some middle color tones, like Viridian and Sap Green. Working into the trunk of the tree, I'm softening where the white masking was. I'm adding a little bit of yellow ochre and softening the hard white line with some damp brush blending. I'm darkening some of the branches as well. Working into the field, I'm doing some blending, and I'm incorporating the area around the figure into the surrounding field. I'm softening and blending some of the white areas as well, where the masking was just removed. And I'm working with that in the middle ground as well. Now I'm working around the bench and the figure. I'm adjusting the shadows around the bench. And then working somewhat into the foreground where the weeds are and where the path is will also take some adjusting. Adding some final trailing branches coming down and hanging over the figure and the field. I'm using good dark colors for this because they were largely in silhouette. I'm doing a little bit of blotting and color removal to show some more blue sky. And I'm softening the blotches of light showing through onto the path. I'm adding color to the foreground where all the big areas of white were masked out. I'm making them into weeds and bushes of different colors. Since they were masked from the beginning, though, the whole area will keep some lightness to it, like there's sun breaking through into that area. And you can see all the adjusting I'm doing. If you paint over this with a light hand and a light stroke, you'll retain the individual lines that you masked in previously. If you paint over it with a heavy hand and go back and forth several times, you'll eliminate all of the lines. So I'm trying to work lightly here and without doing overworking because I want to keep a lot of the lines to indicate the grasses. More lines or more areas of color can be applied, but it's best to wait until everything's very dry before glazing approach, and not working wet on wet at this point because you will lose your textures. And I could feel it pulling together. Lots of little strokes. Some more shading around the bench. And the tree. Another glaze of color to accent the darks of the tree trunk. And you can see the final touches going on with some accent in the leaves as well as in the grasses. Accent colors are generally your darker colors. Now I'm doing some evaluation by covering up side to side, seeing what's needed and where. I'm taking a little color off with the paper towel and a damp brush. And I'm redirecting some of the clumps that are in the distance. I'm going to make the last clumps appear to be partially hiding the path where it curves around to the left, far back in the picture. I'm working wet into wet at this point to try to show a softness about the far background and making some final adjustments in the field grasses. And I'm signing it and it's done. I hope you enjoyed watching my video, Pennypack Preserve Time Out. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. And there's links below where you can subscribe and ring a bell so you won't miss any future videos. Links below to my Facebook art page, my blog, some products that I use, as well as my own art product page where you can buy paintings that I've done on many different kinds of products, cell phone cases, shower curtains, as well as prints. Your comments are always welcome. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.